Let's go beyond the connection. Welcome to the podcast, everyone. I'm Steve MacDonald, your host, and today we have a really interesting conversation in the construction industry. We call it the digital job site and constructing intelligence, and how intelligence and the network and the data and the AI and everything that runs across this is really the fuel for growth in the business. And we have on here ChaChi Gallo. Now, ChaChi, you are the VP of Information Technology at Michels Corporation. And I'd love to learn a little bit more about Michels and your role there. But over your career, you have taken on all kinds of everything from ERP, long-term strategy, understanding how you organize for customers inside of the organization, how you align the different departments inside of the organization, and how technology does that. But what was really interesting is you made a really big point. We were just talking about how this is very much a relationship business. And you have a story from your upbringing that I think is actually really relevant here because it's all about building relationships. So I'd love to just turn it over and just, if you could, for a couple of minutes, maybe expand a little bit more on your background before we get started.
Yeah, so my background's not really typical background as most executives that you probably talk to, mainly because I don't have a college education. So I actually only had my high school equivalency diploma. I just was not your typical student. I could not stand being in a classroom. Very much thought differently on a lot of things. Constantly was that student asking questions in class and challenging history teachers and science teachers and math teachers and those kind of things. And my grades reflected that. So I really didn't know what I wanted to do when I was younger, but I knew it. I loved computers. And I also, in one of my high school classes, which was a high school trade school here in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, I took typing so I could type fast. So I got a lot of positions early in my career just because I could type fast. So I did a lot of data entry and those kind of things. And I ended up working for a quality assurance department at a metal stamping company in Port Washington, Wisconsin. And I ended up befriending the help desk person, and we just became really close. And he was like, man, you're really good with computers, and I think you need to get into IT. And he ended up at my house to help me build a PC because he worked at a company called Milwaukee PC here that's local. And that's where all the gamers went to get their graphics card and their CPU and their case and all that kind of stuff. And honestly, I started by building that PC to play video games with that person. And then that kind of expanded into the video game scene. And then I started competing in gaming competitions with games like Counter-Strike and those kind of things. And then that ended up in what they call clans or groups that would go play together. And then I built websites for them and forums and those kind of things. So I got into web development, and just like there was this hunger to always learn more about that. So I ended up at a software development company, ended up on their help desk. And then just every job after that, it was promoted into a leadership role. And then I realized I was just really good at getting along with people at organizations and getting to know them and building those relationships to get me further in the organization. And that ended up into this organization where we hosted SAP ERP environments for customers in the private cloud that my team built. And we did all their cybersecurity infrastructure, data loads, DR, and business continuity. And I did that for about 7 years. And that's where my career, I really feel, took off, because I learned about global organizations and large corporations and the different compliances and the different needs of those organizations in those 6 to 7 years. Then I rolled into an organization called Generac, where I took over taking their internal on-prem infrastructure to that next level. And I had the challenge of making the on-prem infrastructure solid because it had to host their SAP ERP environment. But they also were doing a bunch of mergers and acquisitions, and they were in all three public clouds for various reasons. So I had to make all that work. That complicated environment really helped me learn fast in my career. And then finally landed me this role of leading an IT organization for Michels Corporation. They reiterated constantly to me in my interview process and in different discussions how important the relationship, especially with the operational side, the construction side, was important. So you had asked earlier about what's Michels do and what they're known for. And it was amazing because I had lived here my whole life, and Michels has been here in Wisconsin their entire existence, out of Brownsville, Wisconsin, which is a small town in the north, population 586, which vendors laugh all the time when I tell them that, because the building we're in Brownsville actually has 800 employees. So just to kind of show you the city itself. I'm sitting in the Milwaukee office, where it's kind of a staple of the Milwaukee Horizon now because it's got Michels on the side, so everybody knows this building. And while I was going through the interview process, I too was learning about Michels. So it was great to find out that they do a ton. I mean, their motto is, we do that and more for a reason, because they do what's called horizontal construction. Normally people think vertical construction, your hospitals, schools, museums, those kind of things. Michels does everything that leads up to those facilities. So they do the foundational work, they do the fiber, the gas lines, the power lines. That's where their organization breaks out into these other entities that service all of those components. Even the road that leads up to it, we have Michels Road and Stone that does that great work. And they're really kind of thriving right now in the data center boom for all of this AI support. They're on a lot of those big contracts for those big data centers for Google and Oracle and OpenAI and all of those. We're doing a huge one out in Port Washington that we're told it's the biggest data center in the world once finished, but I also hear that about a lot of data centers being built out there. So I'm not sure if it's whoever gets across the finish line first, or that's just going to keep getting bigger and bigger, but that's kind of where it is. And then on the other side, they also run a lot of the power utilities. So they do a lot of the power that supports that as well. So that's what Michels does. And again, that's why they always say we do that more, because they have this like core history of people coming to them with really hard things that need to be done in construction and them saying, sure, sign us up. And then they figure it out. They build the tool, they build the equipment, they figure out a way to do that. And I just thought, man, what a great organization to be at, where I could do that for their technology side. I could be the one that we do that and more for all the construction operations. Like, stop worrying about that, guys. Focus on your jobs. IT's got you covered. Let us lead those initiatives for you.
I mean, really interesting, a combination of your background and then with Michels really laying the foundation, the pipeline for the network, the intelligence that these data centers and then all the businesses that they support run on. And I would love to, you've been doing a lot internally to innovate, and you called it constructing intelligence. And I'd just love to give everybody that's listening here your point of view on when you say constructing intelligence and creating a digital foundation that supports everything from the business that is operating here today to AI and into the future. How do you think about that? What does that mean to you?
Well, first of all, I purposely use those phrases, constructing intelligence, data foundation, because you'll notice they have the words constructing and foundation in it, because a lot of, like you said earlier, building those relationships in the businesses, I've got to have them understand why we're doing the things we do. So this is an organization that I use a lot of analogies with construction. I talk about the bid process, or us doing the research and quoting and POC and R&D work to get those things done. They have their master plan or blueprinting phase. We have a similar when we're planning projects and those kind of things. So I try to correlate to terms they understand, so they get the idea of like, oh, that's why it's important. So just like you have to get a permit to do construction work, well, you have to go through cyber and risk to make sure that this product's okay for us to use. Like, we have to do the same checks and balances that we do for our customers. So it helps with that conversation, first of all. But ultimately, to me, the most important thing about AI, and from my experience, especially at Generac and in manufacturing, that we found is, I think manufacturing rushed too much into deploying the tool without that data foundation being in order. And that's why all of these organizations, Gartner and Forrester and you name it, have come out just basically saying a lot of these things are failing. There's 60 to 70% failure rate on a lot of these deployments of AI. That foundation was not set for them to do that, or they didn't realize how much effort you have to put into training that model before you do that. And I think you layer that component being a failure on top of just the term AI being misused constantly in every conversation, and having to educate people on that. When you're saying AI, the majority of users are talking about LLMs or ChatGPT or Perplexity or you name that tool. When I'm talking about laying the foundation for AI, I'm talking about bringing it to that next level, that agentic AI of agents doing the work and then having the human involved to verify that. So to me, that's why data foundation is so important, because we found it over in manufacturing that some of the data sources that you use to build these things, for example, we were trying to build a repository for our call center to support the product for Generac. And we found that bringing in the manuals and the static data and those kind of things were great. But we also tried loading in some conversational history and those kind of things. And you learn that you were kind of training that model to talk like those humans. And they may have made jokes or sarcastic comments or those kind of things. So the response they were giving you is not what you want to be telling the agent on the phone. It was almost like a joke to them. So you had to train that properly. So we learned there were some sources, it was not worth retraining the model to ignore certain aspects of that data source, that you're better off with that static, well understood gold source of truth data And then you train it as you go on what you need the business rules to be, or what you expect it to say on the other end. Or if the senior service techs did the quality control and it said, yes, that's the kind of response we should be having before you rolled it out to newer agents or younger agents that were trying to figure things out.
I love the focus on data here. If we had gone back 10 years in time, everybody was talking about digital transformation. The difference between the business of today and the business of tomorrow is digital transformation, which then really initiated a lot of ERP programs. And you've lived through that. What's the difference today versus 10 years ago when it was all digital transformation, ERP implementation? And now it's almost like you don't even hear those words anymore because AI has just usurped the whole industry and the way we talk about it. Like, what's different between where we were strategically talking 10 years ago and today?
Yeah, and we talked a little bit about this before. I don't think there is a difference. I think we had transitions of technology over time. You had your physical to virtual, you had your virtual to cloud, and now you have the cloud to this data and AI. And I actually probably would say between cloud and AI, there was kind of this BI data and digital transformation aspect too that kind of got mixed up in there as well. But they all had the same pain points and the same problems as people just understanding what was going on, the terminology, the technology, how are we going to utilize it? Most importantly, what every user cares about and every leader and every other business group cares about, what's in it for me, what's the benefit for me on these things. And that's the transition we're all going through. It's just, again, different technology or marketing term. Because I think 5 years ago it was machine learning, which is technically just AI, right? It's just another way to say AI. So we've been doing it for a while. Again, especially manufacturing. The difference between manufacturing and construction is that when I started 8 to 9 years ago in manufacturing, they were kind of where I feel construction is right now. They're just starting to get into the cloud world and the data world and really using those data points to make decisions. So that's why, to me, I can see how hungry the construction business is in gathering data and wanting to use it. I just got to get them the right tools and things on the back end to do what they need to do, because as part of my strategy of rolling out an operating model and a strategy as well as global platforms, because a lot of these companies were operating independently, which is why we're rolling out ERP here, is that what everybody wants out of those systems is the same every single time. They want that data on the other end to look in the way that they want it presented to help them make decisions on future things. So that's why, to me, getting that strategy in order to then get the global platforms in place, the data enablement or constructing intelligence structured in the framework there, will help them be able to trust and know that that information they're getting on the other side is secure and they can trust it. So that's why that focus and that transition has to go that way. That's why data is so important to organizations now. And I would argue has always been important. It was just presented in a different way or used by a different term.
So interesting juxtaposition between like manufacturing where you were in construction today. Manufacturing lots of times is very set. You've got a plant, right? You're in a one location, where in construction, you're in many different locations. You're having to deal with edge technology and data availability in places where a lot of the foundation for sharing data isn't set yet. So how do you create that same infrastructure around technology and data that allows decision making and allow it to happen on site, on locations that aren't finished, that don't have that infrastructure, but still need that connectivity? That's a huge difference between manufacturing and construction.
Yeah. So what I would say to that is I think manufacturing gives the illusion of consistency. Like, that's what they're preaching all the time. They have to be consistent, use the same processes, improve upon them. Six Sigma and lean manufacturing and all those terms you want to use. But in my experience, that wasn't the case. Like any manufacturing company I talk to, every time they build a new facility, they're doing something different. It's very rare that you get consistency there. The only places I've seen consistency like that is in the supply chain and distribution centers, like AWS distribution center. I took a tour of that one time and it was phenomenal. I was like, see, when you have consistency and this stuff never moves, which is exactly what AWS does, they're not moving things around constantly, but manufacturing plants constantly, they want to move shelving or raw material storage, or even some of the manufacturing lines are different line to line. There's that inconsistency there. So I think they have a much better problem to deal with because it's in a building. So you're in that self-contained square footage. So yes, things may move a little more often than we'd want it to, where IT just loves things to be static because that helps us have good wireless and connectivity, and PLMs are working properly and all that good stuff. But you're absolutely right. You hit it on the head that construction sites are so different every time, especially elevation and things you can't see, like the stuff underground, which again, we deal with everything that leads up to a building. So it's all that stuff we can't see underground. That's the biggest struggle for construction. So that's our primary focus, is we're trying to see what layers can we actually get some consistency out of to make decisions on, and which ones do we know the technology just isn't there yet to take advantage of that. So I think of things like autonomous equipment, for example. It's going to be a very long time before you can truly trust autonomous equipment on elevations. So it's going to be a while there. There's some areas where we're taking advantage of it with some robotics underwater because we have a marine division. And even in some of our horizontal drilling, you can have some autonomous, even dump trucks that go back and forth and are just dumping and loading, dumping and loading. Those areas that you can control like that are prime for automation and autonomous vehicles. And hopefully one day AI is controlling some of that, making the right choices for the best path for some of those things. But in other areas you can't. So you have to do things like, instead of maybe having an autonomous, you may have seen some of those from Boston Labs where there's like robotic dogs that can kind of walk around and can handle elevation changes. There's some things I've seen in use cases for safety where those things can walk around and kind of call out safety issues, or just camera towers that can kind of focus. And maybe a construction worker has a vest on that vibrates because noise is a problem. So even if we have a warning, how do you warn them? So you maybe get a vest that vibrates or lights up in their face or something that tells them that there's a safety issue, because that's the biggest focus for construction, is just being safe. So it's going to be this fine balance in the future of nothing safer than a zero-man job site, then only the equipment's at risk. So how do you get to that point while keeping the human safe? So you're slowly trying to work to that path of getting maybe that construction workers in a tower operating that equipment versus actually being in the machine itself. Those are the kind of things where I see it going into the future on construction, but it's going to be a difficult task. But that's what I'm excited about, is I'm not going to be replicating what others have done. I'm going to learn from what manufacturing did and see how we can invent some of those things or be the lead on some of those decisions in the field and out there. As well as you got some great partners with like Caterpillar and Komatsu, where they're doing those kind of things themselves. So you can learn from what they're doing as well with building out that equipment and how we could leverage that in the future.
So I want to take 2 or 3 concepts that were inside of what you were saying there, because we've talked a lot about data. You talked a lot about autonomous tools and machinery. There's a lot of talk these days about autonomous networks that are running independently, and that data, that digital flow, so the decision-making happens. And then you mentioned wireless too. And wireless infrastructure is going to be critical for autonomous devices, autonomous networks, and especially construction, where the job sites are not always located right in the middle of dense population where there's a lot of connectivity, like wired connectivity, or which that infrastructure isn't in there yet. So how do you think about the importance of an autonomous network, a network that relies more and more on wireless connectivity, even not only just leading up to the construction on the job site, but as an important part of the network infrastructure itself?
Yeah, I mean, when you say autonomous, I think a lot of the leaders think, oh, wow, this means I don't need as many people as I have. It can do it on its own. I'm not going to need this bigger group of people. But what I found, again, over my career, I'm just honestly a realist. I've seen this because I'm the one that designed these networks. I'm the one that implemented them in some cases. I code the switches and routers and all the back spine leaf architecture and all that good stuff. Is any company that touted automation, the majority of IT wouldn't enable it. Even in VMware, I remember us having the ability to automatically fail over or move systems and those kind of things, but we'd always end up in headaches when it would automatically do it. So we always wanted that human in the loop of like, no, I want to hit the button to say to move it, to make sure all the stuff is prepared properly before we move it, because as day-to-day changes happen constantly, that becomes a problem. So that's where I'm hoping that like autonomous and automation kind of fix that, is that it knows that knowledge that that IT person had to click that button, that it's learned that what it needs to look for before it makes that action. And that's where I'm hoping that it takes on a lot of that mundane work that the IT team is working on, but not to eliminate those positions, to have them focus on the value tasks, the things that are most important to get done, and really focus on architecting well, and security is done right, and DR is there, and those kind of things, Instead of them now stopping the configuration they were doing, go update the network diagram, go update the documentation, do the change control documentation, get that approved through the CAB meeting, make sure you're analyzing that. There was a security issue. Okay, what changes happened this weekend? And so on and so forth. I'm hoping that the autonomous or automation of AI helps get to the answers faster. But again, I think human will always need to be in the loop. One of the things I've said recently is AI or large language models, that to me is your nail and hammer. You look at agentic AI, well, that to me is the nail gun. That's the leap that you're taking. Is like you're going from this manual thing to this automatic thing. But neither of those things is the carpenter. You're always going to need that human there to kind of direct where it needs to go and how it needs to go. And then it'll get better over time. But I think there's a lot there that people are jumping too quick into this idea of autonomous. And then at a recent function where I spoke at, I said, we went from vision, machine learning to generative AI, and then we were into agentic AI, and then you're going to be into autonomous AI. That's the next, the physical phase. And I said, just remember, right after that was Terminator and Skynet. So we got to be cautious about running into those things too fast, because that's where you end up in trouble. And obviously I'm joking. I don't think that's ever truly happened, but that's why rushing into things too fast and not understanding them can cause damage. And in our world, that could end up being a safety issue, which we want to avoid at all costs. So I'm not too quick to run into the autonomous side and take the human out of the loop. I just want to get humans more productive and get to the answer quicker, or have data quicker that can help them do their gut check with another data point. But none of this should be running the business. It should be augmenting us, not working for us. As I always say, it should think like us, not think for us.
Having AI be able to bring the data together so that the right person inside of IT can make the decision on what to do. And that data is relying more and more and more on kind of like the Internet of Things strategy, where we had a gentleman on, he's the chief technology officer for the world's largest airport. And they just updated the HVAC system. And he said, Steve, we've got 20,000 wireless sensors just on our HVAC system. So a wireless infrastructure inside of a autonomous network or just a network, and what it has to do, whether it's looking at and monitoring trucks and fuel levels, the amount of data that needs to go from a job site over and sharing 3D renderings and different things like that. These days, we've got the wireless carriers from the Verizons and T-Mobiles of the world investing billions into infrastructure. We've got satellite systems that we've never had before. What does that mean? Like the explosion of infrastructure and opportunity around wireless as a part of today's construction site, the digital job site, and how you're thinking about where it's going in the future.
Yeah, I mean, I think it gives us more freedom. Sometimes you're contained by the carrier in your area or those kind of things, which the irony is that Michael's business is to run some of that infrastructure out to areas where it wasn't before. So in some cases, there's literally nothing out there, not even cellular, because we're building the network that's bringing it out to that area. So Starlink to us was a game changer. That satellite internet connectivity, I think that's definitely the future, is going to help a lot. But I also, when I told you earlier that I visited AWS's distribution center, the entire reason of that trip was I was getting a lot of pressure from the advanced manufacturing team to lean into 5G versus Wi-Fi. They just had this belief that 5G was going to be way better than Wi-Fi. And I was in a constant debate with them. So I said, well, let's go out to Amazon's distribution center and see what they're doing with 5G. So one of the first questions we asked in the room with all the people from the facility and from AWS was, tell us about 5G. How are you utilizing it? And they said, we don't use 5G in the facility. We only use Wi-Fi. We only use 5G for the backhaul. That's our tertiary connection. So that's not even our backup's backup. It's our third option if we need it. So even they realized it wasn't as powerful as people were making it out to be. And a lot of people also didn't realize that you had to swap out all of your hardware because your hardware had to support that 5G card or 5G item. So if you had scan guns and label printers and all these other devices, if they weren't 5G compatible, you had to swap all that out too. So it was great to kind of see them come to a realization that, oh, this is going to be harder than we thought, and Wi-Fi isn't the answer. I always say, and this is coming from a guy, I'm networked to the bone. I built these things, I dealt with Wi-Fi issues. I'd always say, if you want it reliable and consistent, it has to be hardwired. You cannot get that with Wi-Fi. You constantly are moving metal things throughout the facility. A fork truck parks next to the line and all of a sudden your Wi-Fi goes bad. I mean, there's all the signal disruption and all this kind of thing. So that's why that consistency again comes back up. So again, to me, the future is going to really rely on those consistent Wi-Fi technologies, which I think satellite is going to be that final answer, because it won't matter where you are or anything. It'll just give you some form of connectivity. And then we'll debate on what's the most reliable service to use, or how can you do this on there versus that, or because those low latency needs aren't going to be there. But the majority of construction environments are just, we need data loads every day. We don't need it to be completely live up to the second, like maybe a manufacturing plant. So we can go with daily loads, or some of the drone footage we can take pass once or twice a day to gather some information and upload it. So not as consistent. Edge technology is not as necessary, other than to just hold that data until the connection's there to load up. But before I got here, I was hearing stories about how guys would have to drive 15 miles to their hotel to load the data from the day because they didn't have the ability to do it from the site. So at least those days are gone for those guys. We have other ways of doing it now. But, every 5 to 10 years, something new comes out that makes that connectivity better. And I think satellite's going to be that thing, which is why I think Elon Musk is so focused on that with Starlink, is to get that infrastructure out there. And right now, there's not much out there competition wise. So I think these companies get their stuff together.
Well, I want to make sure we have time to ask you one final question. And that is, because we've covered so much territory in this conversation already, but if there was one thing that you wanted your peers, technology leaders that are going to be consuming this podcast, one thing that you wanted them to take away, what would that be?
Yeah, so I've said this before. To me, technology is actually easy. It's the people that are hard. Like, we really have to focus on those relationships, getting out there. Don't be that CIO that just sits in the back office looking at dashboards. You got to get out there, not only with your own people, make sure you're talking to more than just your direct leadership, which is why I always tell my team, you can meet with me one-on-one anytime you want. I don't mind those skip level meetings, but I'm just not going to give you direction. I'll give you advice. I'll help you explain the strategy, but you should always take direction from your leadership. Nothing we talk about should be considered direction. I'm just here to kind of help you understand what motivates me and what I'm trying to do for the organization. So you got to get out there and build those relationships. And then again, out in other business units, depending on your business, if you're in manufacturing, get out there to the manufacturing team and get on the lines and visit the sites and do all those kind of things, because I'm a leader that says I'm in the trenches, not the war. I'm going to get out there. I'm going to get dirty a little bit. I may even help you rack a switch once in a while. It all depends on what we're doing in those locations, because I don't want anybody to think I'm asking them to do anything I wouldn't do myself. So you just got to make sure that those leaders don't turn into the ivory tower leader. You got to keep those relationships going with your team and the business, because everyone knows that people don't leave companies, they leave leaders. So if you're a good leader that actually cares about that employee and has some empathy for what they're doing every day and really understands what they do, because I myself have worked for some of these leaders and others who have been great and understood what I did, that it's important that you understand what they do every day, because if they feel like you don't even understand it, I mean, how can you even manage them properly if you don't know what the developer's doing versus the server guy versus the network guy? You got to keep some of those basics sharp and asking questions and reading books and looking into those next technologies. And also, how can you challenge them if you don't? So a lot of the companies I've walked into, my team has said that the best thing that they love about working for me is that I understand what they do, that I can have those conversations with them. And it doesn't have to get too detailed, but I can get down to the details if we need to. Because a lot of times it's not even me needing to understand it, just asking questions that makes them think differently can also help them design something better or make it perform better for the end user. So again, anything I can leave with anybody is it's about the people. It's not really so much about the systems at all.
It makes me think most private equity companies, venture capitalists, they invest in the people first, the idea of the technology second, right?
The good ones too.
Yes, high performance businesses, they have high performance teams, and we have to really think about that. And then focusing then on the relationships there. I have to tell you, I wish we had another hour, but I just want to say thank you for coming on and sharing your vision kind of for where construction's going, where technology is going, the differences between the worlds of ERP, digital transformation, and AI, and the fundamentals are still the same. It's really what we can do, what the tools that we have. And so this mission of this podcast is to take leaders and share from our different perspectives, our different insights, or our different backgrounds. And if we can do that, then it's like the rising tide that lifts all boats. And I thought you were an amazing part of that rising tide today. So thank you, ChaChi, for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Steve. Thank you.